There's a phrase I hear in cybersecurity that always makes me a little nervous, and it is, we're not quite ready. Maybe the assessment isn't finished. Maybe the architecture isn't finalized. Maybe next year's budget hasn't been approved. Maybe we're waiting for another tool, another study, another committee meeting, or another round of executive approval. All perfectly reasonable things until 6 months becomes a year and a year becomes 3. Welcome back to OnTarget with Archer. I'm Stacy Bresler, managing partner at Archer Energy Solutions. And one of the realities of working in critical infrastructure is that cybersecurity improvement can be very complicated. We're dealing with legacy systems, and we got all these operational constraints. We got those regulatory obligations coming out of our you-know-what, vendor dependencies, limited maintenance windows, and equipment that sometimes needs to remain in service for decades. There usually isn't a simple answer, but somewhere along the way, complexity can become an excuse for inaction. We convince ourselves that before we can move forward, we need to have the entire solution figured out. In cybersecurity, it just doesn't work that way. I've been, in the industry for a very long time, and I've seen organizations spend months debating the perfect network architecture while known vulnerabilities remain unsolved. I've seen security assessments produce dozens of recommendations, followed by another assessment 2 years later, identifying many of the same exact issues. Not because people don't care, it's because everyone was waiting for the larger solution, and sometimes the larger solution just never comes. That's why one of the most important characteristics of a mature cybersecurity program is the ability to make incremental progress. Maybe you can't replace your legacy system this year. Fine. Which ones create the greatest risk? Maybe you can't completely redesign your OT network. Okay. What segmentation improvements can you make now? Maybe the ideal identity and access management solution is still 2 years away. But what can you do today to reduce unnecessary access and strengthen the accounts that matter most? This isn't settling for mediocre security. I call it managing risk. There's a huge difference between accepting imperfection and accepting inaction. Mature organizations, they understand that they have a long-term strategy, but they're always constantly looking for practical opportunities to reduce risk along the way. And sometimes those improvements are surprisingly simple. Remove an unnecessary connection. Simple. Display or disable an old account. Not too hard. Close an unused port. Usually just a few minutes to do that. Update a procedure, maybe a little longer, but still pretty easy to do. Improve a backup process, a little more strategic, but not all that hard to do. Clarify who owns something. Well, that sometimes can be difficult, but it's easy. None of those things will transform your cybersecurity program overnight, but you do enough of them consistently, and something important happens. Your risk begins moving in the right direction. I think we sometimes underestimate the power of that. Cybersecurity maturity isn't one giant project that eventually gets finished. It's hundreds of decisions made over time, some big and, of course, some small, but all moving forward a more resilient organization. So if there's a cybersecurity initiative in your organization that has been sitting on the roadmap waiting for everyone to line up perfectly, maybe the question isn't, when can we finish this? Maybe the better question is, what can we improve right now? Because perfect is a destination cybersecurity programs rarely reach. Progress is something we can make today. Well, that's it for this episode of OnTarget with Archer. I'm Stacy Bresler, and keep moving forward, and I'll see you next time.
Don't miss out on any of our insightful content. Hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell to stay informed whenever we release new videos. For top-tier security solutions, Archer is your trusted partner. Explore our offerings at archerint.com and get in touch via email or phone to fortify your company's defenses. Your questions drive our content. Leave them in the comments below and join us every Monday for a fresh episode of On Target with Archer.